Greetings, my name is Jo Macness. I am the Chief Strategy and Operating Officer here at the Haas School of Business. That's my day job. My evening and weekend job is being the parent of two elementary school age boys. And I thought I'd just start by giving you a little bit of a sense for one of my conversations that I had with them this weekend. So we were chatting about tonight's event in the car on the way to our fifth soccer match of the weekend, yesterday afternoon. For those of you who are parents, you know how that soccer mom thing goes. And, I was discussing how excited I was about tonight's event and our special guests and the topic of the conversation. And my 9-year-old says, "Well, Mom, I think Rosa Parks should be on the $10 bill. Do you even know what she did?" And I was like, "Yep, I've heard, because he's in that phase where he thinks that I know nothing." But I was very excited. My heart sort of opened, skipped a beat, if you will. I was like, yes, they are teaching him the right things in Oakland Public Schools. This is all good. Anyways, I turned to my husband and I was sort of lamenting to him and I said, "Oh man, it's too bad that we don't have a female president to put on the $10 bill." I'm like, well, maybe that's coming, right? She's not dead, so she wouldn't qualify. But anyway, so I'm just in the middle of lamenting on that, and my 6-year-old pipes in from the back. And he says kind of quietly, he's like, "But Mama, can girls even be US presidents?" And I thought about it. Can girls even be US presidents? Well, so in the business of parenting, we call that a teachable moment. In the business of teaching here at the Haas School of Business, we call that a teachable moment. And clearly, gender equality is something that we need to talk about more in our household. It's something we could probably do to talk a little bit more about in our elementary schools and in our high schools. And certainly this is part of the dialogue here at the Haas School of Business. And I'm delighted also to welcome Treasurer Rios, for whom she's been elevating the dialogue at the national stage. We're very grateful to you for doing that. So, that's the end of my story. We're gonna move on. I'm gonna tell you that I am absolutely delighted to introduce Rosie Rios. She was born just down the street from here in Hayward, California. She is the 43rd Treasurer of the United States. In this role, Treasurer Rios oversees the U.S. Mint, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, the Savings Bond Marketing Office, which, if you have time, you might tell us what that does. She serves as the advisor to the director of the Mint, the director of the Engraving and Printing Bureau. She's also, of course, an advisor to the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, as also the Secretary of the Treasury on coinage and currency issues. Treasurer Rios is a first-generation Mexican-American and the 6th Latina to occupy the office. She is also the 3rd consecutive Californian to occupy the office. Before making the move to the national stage, though, Treasurer Rios led significant positive change here in the East Bay in several economic development roles in Union City, San Leandro, Fremont, and also in Oakland, where she was credited with revitalizing the city's pretty sort of flagging economy back in 2001 by attracting hundreds and hundreds of different new businesses through her new development projects. Rios then became a partner at an economic development consultancy, and she also moved on to McFarland Partners, where I believe you're still kind of taking a leave of absence, a little bit of a long one. You can tell us more about that. It's a real estate investment firm in San Francisco. But in 2008, Rios joined Obama's presidential campaign and then When President Obama won that election, she became joined the President's Treasury Federal Reserve transition team. In May 2009, President Obama officially nominated her as the US Treasurer, and she was confirmed by the Senate that July. As I said before, I am both delighted and honored to welcome Treasurer Rios to our Dean's Speaker Series, and I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit more about this initiative that you've been working on for at least the last 5 years.
Yes. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Folks may not know it, but I actually attended the Haas School of Business, albeit for a very short amount of...
You didn't tell us that part.
I did. So if I had one regret in life, it's that I didn't finish the program. There were a few of us at that time who fled to the riches of Silicon Valley. So finish your schoolwork, whatever you do. But it's great to be back here. Actually, this is the new Haas School of Business. It was not the new school when I was here. So great to be back, great to see this, and great to be part of this discussion. So as Joe mentioned, I've been on board with the administration now officially since 2009. I am now the longest serving senior Treasury official in this administration. Had a chance to see it all the way from the beginning of the financial crisis to today. I am there because of this particular project, and I remain because of this particular project, which is my goal to place a woman on our currency for the first time in 119 years. Thank you. Thank you. Just a little bit of background. We only had a woman on our U.S. currency twice in our history. The first time was 1865. It was Pocahontas on the back of a 20 in a kind of a group shot. And the second and last time was 1896, Martha Washington with George Washington on the back of a silver certificate. We've never had a woman since it became a Federal Reserve note in 1914. So it's been a very long time. There really isn't any particular reason why we haven't. It just has been one of those, I think people just hadn't thought about it before. So I'm thrilled it's part of the discussion now. Just to give you a little bit of a process and timeline overview. On June 18th, Secretary Liu, who is my boss, announced that we would embark on this public engagement process to solicit feedback for the very first time in the administration through our social media portal. So we have, if you go on the new10.treasury.gov, you will find a social media splash page that aggregates almost real-time results from Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Very exciting. And at the same time, we've been hosting these roundtables all around the country. And we've impacted well over 1.5 million. I think it's closer to 2 million people who have given us their feedback. And we hope to make a decision in the very near future on who will be placed on the $10 bill. But I see this as the beginning of a conversation, not the end. I think it's been a little bit of an epiphany for me to realize many, many things. One, how little people know about our American history. That's absolutely the truth. And how little people know about women in American history. So as we think about kind of this 5-year countdown to the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote, which is in 2020, this is, for me, kind of the 5-year time frame to really, hopefully, continue this conversation about the history of women in this country and continue the conversation beyond 2020 about what more we need to do, what more we need to think about. And so I'm thrilled to be back here. And I know this is going to be kind of a moderated panel, but I'm anxious to get people's feedback on a couple of things. One is, yes, whom should we be considering for our currency? And the only criteria legally is you have to be dead. So you don't have to be president. You just have to be dead. And the decision is actually made by the Secretary of the Treasury, by law, not Congress, not the president. It's the Secretary of the Treasury who makes the final decision. And again, we'll make that announcement before the end of the year, unveil the design in 2020, commemorating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, and we anticipate that the notes will be issued shortly thereafter. So again, thrilled to be part of what I'm sure is going to be a very historic moment in our history. And why am I doing this? Because I have a 15-year-old daughter, and because I have a 19-year-old son. And the fact that I see so many men in this room is touching, because this isn't just about our mothers and our daughters. and our aunts and our nieces. It is about our fathers and our brothers and our uncles and everyone else who plays a role in recognizing not just our history, but our future. So thank you all for being here.
All right, so we're going to try and accomplish quite a lot tonight. We have a very distinguished group of lovely ladies up here in the front. And, you know, we were just doing a little bit of a round robin in the Dean's conference room earlier, and I had a whole bunch of notes on all of the interesting things that you all do. And then I thought, gosh, they did such a better job of saying what they do than what I had written down that I think I'm just going to have you all introduce yourselves. So why don't we start with Julie down here at the end, who is just a little shorter than the rest. It's a temporary thing, so hopefully you can all see her, but maybe you can just wave a little higher. So Julie, why don't you give us just a very brief who you are, and then I would also like to hear from you on who your recommendation is
right
for.
out of the gate.
Yeah, right out of the gate.
Okay.
We're not messing around here. We're just going straight to it.
All right, fantastic. Hi, thanks for looking down low. I hurt my knee over the weekend, so I'm down here gimping around with a cane. So thank you for tolerating if you can't see me. I went to Haas as an undergrad, graduated in 1997, which sounds very, very, very long ago, and have spent my career out of school. I was in strategic consulting at Bain & Company for many years. I went and got my MBA somewhere else, but wanted to live on the East Coast for a few years, so tried that, and then hurried back to the West Coast as soon as I was done with that, and then went into private equity and spent a long time in private equity doing a lot of consumer growth equity investing, and got the opportunity to help a lot of really great brands grow up, which was a ton of fun and a ton of learning and great. And in it, formulated a couple sort of points of view. One is, as we just heard about, I think the world is a better place when women participate, and I think the business world is a better place when women participate. And it has nothing to do with women's issues. I just think women bring a lot to the table, and oh, by the way, they're 50% of the population. And so really was disheartened by seeing how many companies were primarily men and how many boards were primarily men, and so spent a lot of my time trying to help women entrepreneurs and women board members, and became a board member on several companies myself. So that I just think, and again, it's not really a women's issue, it's just a business issue, in that we can't neglect that really great part of our population. And recently decided I wanted to go do it for myself, and so have joined. A friend of mine has this great company called T Collection, which is kids clothing, and joined her as CFO and helping her build that great business. So it's really, really fun to sort of go on to the operating side of the world. And it's also particularly fun to finally work with women, and so the company is 80% women, which I enjoy every single day. So that's my background. And in terms of I had so much fun researching this topic. Normally I go on panels and I don't really have anything to research, I just get to talk, but this time I actually got to research.
Made you work for this one.
You did make me work, and what I realized as I was doing it was, and it's funny because Jo and I were talking about this earlier, where she said, gosh, I grew up in England, I didn't really study US history, and I said, well, I grew up here and I didn't study women's history, because let me tell you, we didn't study women's history. I mean, when I started this, I could think of, a very small number of really great women, and I've spent a fair number of years. I have an 8-year-old daughter, I have a 5-year-old son, and have been doing all the right things of buying her the A to Z of amazing women, and trying to set all these role models. So I really was inspired, and I think it's so great that you've started this conversation, because hopefully there's women and girls doing this exact same kind of research. So for me, I got so inspired by so many of these women, it was hard to choose. I actually came up with a woman who wasn't sort of on the short list, and she was lesser known, and to me that was one of the appealing pieces, because I had to do a little bit more research. But her name was Belva Ann Lockwood, and she was the first woman to argue before the Supreme Court. And if you do a little digging on her, she was a teacher, she got married, she sort of followed the traditional path. Her husband died when her daughter was 3. She became a single mom, which in the mid 1800s is a particularly hard thing to do, just like it is now. And she decided she really wanted to go into politics, and so she was in Boston, she moved her daughter to Washington, D.C., and decided to go to law school, and graduated at 43, and was one of the first female lawyers. Her law school, which is now Georgetown, didn't want to issue a diploma, even though she technically graduated. So she rallied and lobbied the President of the United States at the time to get her diploma. He granted it. She got her diploma, was able to join the bar, and then lobbied to go in front of the Supreme Court and became the first woman to argue in front of the Supreme Court and took on a lot of suffragist issues and women's vote issues and argued a lot of the legislation that eventually led to women getting the vote. So to me, that she was this lesser known woman that I'd never heard of in my entire life, but who just embodied a lot of really great values that I would love for more people to know.
Wow.
So that was mine.
Terrific story. Thanks for doing the research.
It was fun. I miss school.
I'm going to say something. Students always. Yeah. All right, we're going to go on down the line here. Larissa, will you just give us a brief on who you are and your top pick?
My top pick, great. So my name is Larissa Roesch. I'm a Haas MBA 97. So it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. In between first and second years of Haas, and then after I graduated, I joined an investment management firm in the Bay Area called Dodge & Cox. We were very small in 97, and we're not so small now. I am one of 3 women on our 8-member policy committee that sets strategy for our fixed income portfolios, and we were just noted by Morningstar as having the best female portfolio manager representation. So
terrific.
Which is in our firm, which is great. Good. Investment management, portfolio management, security analysis, not a field that has a lot of women in it. So, like Julie, it has been an interesting journey and a challenge, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, perhaps. But I've been at this firm for 18 years, and I still love it. So on to my pick, and I'm going to use my notes just so I don't forget anything. First of all, it really is such an honor to be part of this discussion. As I thought about who to recommend, I asked a lot of friends and family and my 7.75-year-old son who's in the audience.
Oh! Well, Mom.
Almost. You're almost 8. So we have almost the same birthday, so I know.
And I hear Calder has a pick too, right?
Calder has a pick too.
Okay,
maybe we'll hear from that later.
Yeah.
But I thought also about, we're here in California, we're here at Berkeley, and what are the qualities that we want, that we can bring? What's unique about this discussion as opposed to others? And I came up with a lot of ideas like imagination and bounty and pioneer and innovation, all of these qualities that define California. And so I came up with 3 criteria, because that helped me kind of narrow the field of the many, many women that I thought would be wonderful. The first was a leader of whom we can all be proud. So for everybody can feel proud and feel like they can connect with this person. An innovator who achieved success on her own merits rather than being married to somebody or through someone else's wealth or whatever. And then a pioneer who fought for progress for humankind. Because I think one of the key things for me as I look out at women's rights issues is that we really need to make this a human issue, and until it becomes a human issue, it will continue to be something that is us against them, and it becomes more of a battle rather than a journey that we all take together. So with those 3 criteria, I then looked back to the theme, and the theme is democracy, right? Of democratic ideals, striving to make those ideals a reality, and then coinciding with the fact that this will be the 100th anniversary of women getting the vote. So with all of those criteria and weeding and sorting out and narrowing down, I came out with one woman, and it's a woman who was very, very involved in the suffrage movement, but was very much overshadowed by another woman in the suffrage movement because the other woman had a biography written about herself. So I'm not focusing on that woman who's already been recommended, but I instead have focused on Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding, which is great because she's been one of my heroes for as long as I can remember. But just fleshing out who she is. So born in 1815, she was the daughter of a Federalist lawyer, which I really liked because Alexander Hamilton is a Federalist lawyer. So that made a nice connection for me. And she grew up in this household that was very infused with the law, and so she learned about law at an early age and learned that men and women did not have the same rights or were not equal in the eyes of the law, and especially married women who didn't have the right to employment or income or even custody over their own children. So she made the decision at a very early age to go out and get a formal education and to fight for those rights that she felt were God-given. And I have a quote from her later on this. She was also an early abolitionist, so a dear friend of Frederick Douglass's, and fought for interracial marriage in the early 1800s, which I also just thought was the coolest thing ever. And so really her life's work was to fight not only for women's rights, but for human rights. Now, she's perhaps most well known for being one of the organizers of the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, and this gathering, as many people know, is really credited for being the ignition for the women's rights and suffrage movements in the US. But Elizabeth's Declaration of Sentiments, which was based on the Declaration of Independence, she said something that I also think is really neat. She said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." All men and women are created equal. It's so simple, but it was so revolutionary at the time. So just in conclusion, thinking about this woman who was an intelligent, fearless pioneer for more than 50 years, Elizabeth Cady Stanton sadly died in 1902, 18 years before women got the vote. But she has my vote for being the woman on the $10 bill.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are we going to go on down the line? I guess we should. Morgana, you ready?
Sure. Hi, my name is Morgana Davids. I'm a current student here, second year full-time MBA. I'm co-chair of the Women in Leadership Conference, co-president of Investment Club, and a principal of the Socially Responsible Investment Fund. And after school, I will be working in the field of investing. So very excited to be sitting next to all of these amazing women who work in finance. And when I was thinking about this topic, for me, the two factors that really stood out were, first of all, when I think about our currency and what you're carrying around in your pocket every day, I really wanted whichever woman we choose to be someone that really embodies American values and a lot of sort of our core founding principles. So that was one. And then the other big criteria for me was I would love it if it was someone who, when my future children look at the different bills and ask me for stories about the different people on the different bills, that it's the woman who has some of the more exciting stories. That sounded like a lot of fun to me, and something that would really help deal with some of the issues that Joe was talking about with not necessarily as much awareness about some of the great things that women have done. So with that being said, when I looked through all the different options and tried to do some research, I kept coming back to Harriet Tubman, who I know has already been recommended. I think there's a lot of strong reasons why she's already been recommended. For me, she really does embody all of the concepts of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. I mean, she was an advocate for people who didn't have those rights and risked her own life in order to try to make that happen, and was successful, which is completely amazing. And I think the stories about the Underground Railroad always really inspired me as a kid. I also think one of the things for me that I don't want us to ever forget is that in the role of a minority, one of the problems often has been that the successes that people have, they often didn't have the same level of support and encouragement that the people in the majority did. And there's this great letter that Frederick Douglass wrote, sort of an open letter to Harriet Tubman, where he essentially described how she'd been working in private and in the shadows, and he'd been working in the public and with encouragement of a lot of people. And I just really think that sort of embodies a lot of the struggle that women have faced over the years. People who were telling them that, why would you want to do this? Women don't do this or shouldn't do this. And so someone like Harriet Tubman really speaks to me and is a great inspiring model.
That's great. All right. Now, thank you. Now, are we even allowed to ask you this question? Is this one of the questions you can or can't answer, Treasurer Rios?
About who I would put?
I want to know. Can we ask you that? Or is
Well,
that kind of like,
I definitely have a strong recommendation. I've been working on this project for
Have you
many,
told your
many
boss?
Years. Yes, actually, Secretary Geithner was the one who first approved this in 2012. So it's been a long work in progress. But publicly, I would put my mom on there in a heartbeat if I could. But she's still alive, thank God. But
exactly, so
I
she
would
doesn't
put my
quite
mom
fit
on
the
there.
criteria. But I gotcha. Right. Terrific. Okay, we're going to move on.
All right, so I'm Rachel Park. I'm a second-year MBA and MPH student, and I'm coming from the consulting world and diving into the world of healthcare and how we can innovate further in the U.S. healthcare system. And on campus, I'm involved at the Haas Gender Equity Initiative to figure out, now that we're 43% women, how do we redo the structural reforms so that, women can feel included kind of for many years to come. And so as I was thinking about this issue and as I'm hearing this conversation, I think what's also great about this initiative is that it's ultimately a conversation about our own personal values. And so I think it's really cool to just hear about some of the picks. And so part of the values that I chose was, one, I also wanted someone relatively unknown. So someone who's going to pique people's interest, make them go to Wikipedia and just learn more and dive into that rabbit hole of women's history. The second is that, were they a bridge to other causes? So outside of feminism and outside of helping other women, were they able to kind of use that empathy to bring other people along, even if it was a long time ago? And finally, this is the modern professional businesswoman in me talking, but did she make her mark outside of the policy and advocacy realm? So did she have another career? Did she advance another field? And did she have other accomplishments in addition to advancing the cause of women? And so during my extensive research as well, I learned so much over the past few weeks. My pick is Ida B. Wells Barnett. And so I see some nods of recognition, some others that will go to Wikipedia tonight. So she's a super interesting story. But essentially, I think she's so fascinating because her career spanned across women's suffrage, documenting mob violence in the South, all the way to the civil rights movement and being involved in co-founding the NAACP. And so I think she just has a really nice trajectory of just advancing kind of causes throughout her lifetime. And she was also just a damn good journalist. And so data journalism is this hot thing right now where, investigative reporters are trying to get data to tell a story. And she was doing that in the 1800s. And so she collected data on the causes of lynchings in the South to prove a point that a lot of these weren't about crimes that people were committing, but rather kind of economic or personally motivated crimes. And so by laying that out in a very logical way and just showing the data in a way that's still very, very readable today, I think she was also a great journalist and a great pick for the $10 bill.
Terrific. Great choice. Sydney, last but not least, and I'm gonna cue the audience and just let you know that it's your turn next. So as Sydney's talking, I want you to be thinking about what you're gonna say, and there's a mic right there that's gonna be ready for you once Sydney's done. So, Sydney, tell us a little bit about you and then who your pick is.
Thank you. So, hello everyone. My name is Sydney Thomas, and I'm a second-year MBA student full-time with Morgana and Rachel. Really grateful and humbled to be on this panel. And on campus, I hang out a lot with Rachel and Morgana, actually. I'm on the Gender Equity Initiative with Rachel. I'm on the admissions team, so understanding our data and where we're losing our women applicants and how we can better understand those needs so that the following years, when we are asking women to apply again and again, we have better recognition of where we might lose some women through the leaky pipeline, and we can create programs to ensure that they end up coming to Haas, and because we love them here. And then my other work at Haas is on the Women in Leadership board, and so I am co-chair of the conference coming up on Saturday, March 12th, 2016. Mark your calendars. I hope to see you.
And it is the...
It's going to be the 20th annual conference, so big deal. So please be there. So when thinking through who I wanted to recommend for the $10 bill, I think a lot of what these women said definitely resonated with me. But something that I kept coming back to was just this feeling of understanding that for women, we always have to be twice as good, and especially as a minority woman, always have to be twice as good to get the same level of recognition as a man who fits the majority stereotype. And so thinking through that and thinking through what woman I think has been twice as good and can really really compete with the other people on the rest of the currency currently in the United States, I really came back to Shirley Chisholm. And so I know that everyone has heard of her. I hope everyone has heard of her. And she's a politician, New York congresswoman, or she was. She passed, so she does fit the criteria. But I think that given her work in Congress, that she really musters the amount of respect, I think, conventionally. You don't have to second guess that pick. And what I want is a woman who will have a legacy on this $10 bill. Because when I was researching, what I found was that we've had a lot of people on our currency actually over the course of our history. So we've had generals, we've had Pocahontas, as was mentioned, and Martha Washington, but also a number of other people, from inventors to explorers, and however they've fallen off. And I think a large reason that they have fallen off is because when push comes to shove, they weren't given that same level of respect as some of the other presidents on our dollar bills. And so I wanted to make sure that this woman would stay on there forever. And I think that Shirley Chisholm definitely could. So excited to hear your guys' feedback on who you recommend to be on the $10 bill, but that's my pick.
Terrific. Right there. Okay, so it is time for you all. Now, I'm not going to put the pressure on if you haven't already done the Students Always bit and researched as much as our panelists have. You don't have to tell me your pick, but if you do have any questions, I wanted to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions. I've got a couple myself, but wanted to make sure that you all have the opportunity to either share your thoughts or ask some questions. Come on up.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for being here. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I'm a first-year full-time MBA student, and my question is about the longevity of this program and this initiative. Given that we do have a presidential election coming up, and in the last Republican debate, there was a sincere lack of substantive answers for this question. And given that we don't know who's going to be president in the very near future, I'm just curious, what is the strategy to ensure that this is an initiative that has legs and that it can't be reversed should we not have a supportive person in the White House in the very near future?
That's a great question. I don't think we've ever been asked that question about how do you have staying power with this initiative. I think the truth is, again, it's at the discretion of the secretary. Unless Congress or someone else changes a law that says someone else has that decision, it is still going to remain the Secretary of the Treasury. If there is another Secretary of the Treasury who succeeds this one who wants to change their mind, that is absolutely their discretion to do so. So what we wanted to make sure was that we followed through with a robust public process, that we did go through and hopefully touch as many people as physically possible. I know that when we first launched this in June, in that first week alone, I met with over 1,000 people. And for me, there is no wrong answer, right? This is almost like an interesting Rorschach test. It's not like any one of these answers that were given were wrong. And I think that's the beauty of this process, is everyone has an opinion, which is wonderful, but if the goal is that it starts the conversation, not ends the conversation, that's the goal. I would like to think, and I think the Secretary would like to think, that the decision that is made when the announcement happens, hopefully in the near future, it would be interesting to see if anyone who succeeds as secretary would actually try to reverse it. It's doubtful. Is it possible? Absolutely. I doubt it, though. I doubt it. I think, again, that's why it is the first time in the history of our country that we're going through this process. That is the spirit of democracy, is that everyone has a voice, an opinion, and in the end, there has to be leadership. So we hope that's the case. It's a great question, though. We've never been asked that.
Thank you. And let us know who you are.
Hi, I'm Sonia. I'm a full-time MBA second year. Thank you all for being here. It's an honor to hear you. My question is, has there been a separate initiative to put a minority on the currency, or are people hoping that we get a woman who's also a minority? Or, what's being talked about there?
Yeah, another great question. I don't think we've kind of checked all the boxes, so to speak. I think if you were to ask the secretary, as we've had these discussions over many years, I think what some of the values that were expressed here are certainly the values that are being discussed. So hopefully it is someone who embodies the spirit of how we define democracy. Democracy means very different things to very different people. For some people, democracy is choosing your leadership, having the right to vote, having a say in our governance. For some people, democracy could be a more inclusive environment, a more progressive environment where everyone has a seat at the table. For some people, democracy could be something completely different. So that is the beauty of the conversation. If for some people, if the secretary believes that inclusivity is one of the priorities for his decision, then that could make a difference. But I wouldn't say we've categorized it in that way. I think when we think about themes, I think some of the themes that have risen to the surface have been themes that include, for example, public service, suffrage activists. One of my favorite themes is something that I call New Frontier. So that could include, Amelia Earhart, Sally Ride, Grace Hopper. So it's more themes, I think, more than anything, about themes that would resonate with the history of our country. The secretary has made it clear in the past that he is definitely thinking about and considering people who perhaps have overcome some type of struggle to pursue their dreams, pursue what this country was based on in terms of liberty, et cetera. So there's still some time. It's not like there's anything decisive today. I can make that very, very clear. But I do know it's been an amazing, I guess, epiphany for many of us who have been part of this process. One, I think, was mentioned. Every time I go on our splash page and I see a name that I don't recognize, I immediately go to Wikipedia or Google or whatever, and I'm trying to figure out, oh my God, how come I didn't know this person? And then you realize that there's some amazing stories out there, just amazing stories of people I had never even heard of. And we're well over a few hundred individual names. Some names keep repeating themselves, Beyonce and some others. But of the different names that are floating, there's hundreds, literally hundreds of historical figures that I had never heard of. And in some ways, it's kind of shame on me, and in some ways, it's kind of shame on my education, shame on whatever. But I think there's more. There's so much more that we could all do to learn about our history.
Yeah, it's a terrific learning process for sure. Looks like we have another question.
Yes.
Except for Jim.
Hi, my name is Rosie. I'm a senior Peace and Conflict Studies major, and I'm here with the Latino Business Student Association. And on what you were talking about, how you don't know really, there's a lack of knowledge of what women have accomplished, and a lack of knowledge of multiple changes that women have accomplished. So what can we do now as students? What can we do in this room to make sure that the next generation knows of these accomplishments and is aware of that?
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous question. And this is what I'm going to give you the same answer that I give to someone when I'm asking them whom they would consider and they have no idea. It's like a blank look on they don't know. They have no idea. And I say to them the same thing, which is go home and have this conversation at the dinner table. Go to your neighborhoods, go to your communities, go to your classrooms. If you have kids, go to your kids' teachers and say that you want to learn more about the accomplishments that women have made to our history. Because the more that people have this conversation, if you can make an ever so little dent on this generation and the next generation, it's going to be to the point where we don't have to talk about putting a woman on currency. It's just going to be talking about historical figures, people who made a difference in this country, regardless of gender. I think it's interesting. I recently, August 18th to be exact, I got an email from my high school American history teacher. I haven't taken his class, I'm embarrassed to say it, 32 years. And he saw a clip on TV, and he sent me an email. And he's still teaching at my high school. He's been there 35 years, still teaching American history. And he said he's very much aware of the contributions that women have made to our history. He teaches it every day. But he said when he learned of this effort and he saw that I was taking the lead and that I've been working on this for years and that he taught me American history, he thought it was interesting. And he said when he walked into the classroom for the very first time this year in August, he realized that in the 35 years he'd been teaching this class, there were no photos of women or pictures of women on his walls. Not one. And he had no idea. For him, it was just a different way to think. And we usually go with what we know. So if you're a high school student sitting in a classroom and you're a woman and you realize that you're learning about all this great American history, but there's no one on the walls, we usually go with what we know. We go with what we see. We value what we see. And he realized it was not a deliberate omission. I know, I've known him forever, and I know that he would never, and that's what he was saying, it was never anything other than he never thought about it before. So if we can start with one teacher, or 100 teachers, or 1,000 teachers, or 1 million parents, can you imagine that this conversation would just be part of our everyday life versus some novelty? And that's what I hope happens.
Yeah, well, this is a terrific start. I'm going to expand on your question and ask some of the other panelists for examples of how you've been elevating the dialogue in your arenas. So clearly, Treasurer Rios has been doing a terrific job on the national stage, but just a couple of examples if anyone's got one that they want to share. Yeah, Julie.
So I'll also answer, I have just to add to that, I think the other thing we can do to continue this part of our dialogue and make it a lasting effort, I'll just put a plug in, is vote. And vote for people that are going to make it a priority, and vote for people that are going to continue having it be a dialogue in the way you want it to continue to be a dialogue. I mean, that's just my one plug. The one part of my biography I didn't put in is I was actually born in the USSR, and my parents came here as refugees, and it still to this day blows my mind how many people don't vote because we fought so hard for that ability, and it's such a privilege, and we see it now all over the world where people are literally dying for the right to vote, and we don't take advantage of it. So that's my non-women's issue plug. In terms of things we can do other than voting and the administration, on the political front, it is really important if you look at what's happened under the current administration with the representation of women and minorities in cabinet positions and in legal positions. It's really amazing, and so I really hope that continues. What I think we can do as individuals, or one thing that I try and do as individuals, is just show people that it can be done and break a few glass ceilings, and I think that's part of why I also chose the person I chose, is just when I joined private equity, I within 2 years got pregnant with my first child, and needed to make up my own maternity leave policy because there were no women in my office who weren't secretaries, frankly. And I went out and found other women in private equity in the Bay Area, and there were 5 with kids who were in senior positions, and there were 5 of us. It's like, we should have lunch. We're a little club. But I think showing, and now that was 10 years ago, and now I look around and there's so many more women in private equity, and I think I made a teeny little dent in that in talking to women in business schools and showing, you know what, it can totally be done. And is it hard? Yeah, but you can make it happen. And hopefully if I've inspired a handful of women, then they'll go inspire a handful of women. And I think just showing that it can be done. And I think that's what a lot of these women up here have done, and the women that they're choosing. I just think making it part of the dialogue. And to your history teacher's point, it's not necessarily conscious, but by not having female heroes, by not having female superheroes. I think about, all the things that the toy companies are now really waking up and realizing, by not having women who we can look up to and talk about in a really powerful way, and not ask them what fashion designer they're wearing, but ask them something more interesting and intellectual. I think, to me, that's the most powerful thing we can do, is just change the dialogue of, I hope one day it just becomes, she happens to be a woman, and it doesn't have to sort of fight your way through it.
Can I just comment on that real quickly? Because that goes back to the theme of democracy and why we deliberately chose the theme of democracy. And there's a little story that goes with it, which is, if you think about, and it goes back to one of the points that you made earlier about the business aspect, which is, if you think about what happened, 7 years ago, the beginning of this administration. So it was the height of the financial crisis. I was over in DC working on the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, and the sky was falling, literally, the sky was falling as part of the transition team. And we elected our first African American president, right? Very significant, monumental hope and change. And then, our economy was still spiraling. My goodness, even in January when he took office, in February when he took, a month later, economy was still spiraling. And what was interesting about that time period was, one thing that I learned is and you kind of see signs of it now, is it became kind of this organic activism. And it was because of the advent of mass scale use of social media, right? So you're giving a voice to the voiceless, right? It was all about that same time. And so you had what became the beginning of the Tea Party movement and beginning of the Occupy movement, all culminating around the same time. And it wasn't just domestically, right? You saw what happened with the Arab Spring. You saw what was happening in Egypt. And it continued. And if you think about, again, the ability to choose one's leadership, the ability to think about an inclusive environment, all of that was, again, in the theme of democracy. And even now, last summer was the first time that Turkey had its first direct presidential election. Or even what you hear in Hong Kong, what are they calling that? Pro-democracy movements. So for that reason, we know that we can't do the same things that were happening in the past. We can no longer do things the same. It has to be different. And being different means bringing different people to the table, because what was happening before was not working. So if you bring different people to the table, from a business perspective, from a social perspective, a cultural perspective, an economic perspective, that's how change happens, with different voices. So that's why democracy was chosen. It was not a gender issue. It was not about, let's think about how to put a woman on currency. That's not how this started. This started with the theme of doing something very different, because what was happening before didn't work. And it's just time to do things differently.
That's a terrific story. Anyone else got anything to add to that last question? Or you're up. I'm sorry to have made you stand for such a long period of time, but we got going on that.
I sit in class all day, it's fine. Thank you guys very much for being here. My name is Terrence McPherson, first year, a full-time MBA student. A lot of you mentioned that there are kind of tales that you would like to pass down to your children, stories about powerful women, really influential women, the things that they've done. I know a lot of kids also kind of learn through inductive reasoning. They see examples of something and it forms their view of the world. So not just from an academic standpoint, but what other forms of media would you like to see more representation of women? And you mentioned superheroes. I'm a big geek, so that was super cool. But like just any other channels that you think that we would like to see more women doing this as well, so that your kids can socially see that it's possible and make it the norm.
For me personally, women in finance. Women in finance. Let me say that one more time, women in finance. I just think, and the work that's been done with some of the folks up here in terms of advocating for more women in matriculating, hopefully more women professors, hopefully more women in the networking for alumni, that is so important. That is so important. And there's something to be said about, money and power. Having power over money, how decisions are made in terms of allocation of resources and hiring and all the other leadership decisions that happen at the corporate level and in the world of finance is so key. And in my opinion, it is one of the last frontiers that we haven't really quite penetrated. And there just needs to be a lot more work to be done. I mean, the fact that I reached out to Laura Tyson and she had participated in our Women in Finance symposiums that I started in Treasury in 2010. And then she ran with the ball, literally ran with the ball and made it happen. And you know, would it have happened if I didn't reach out to her? I don't know. But the fact that she took a leadership role because she knew where my heart was, she knew what was important to me in terms of women in finance and how to have this discussion taken to the next level. It was her leadership that made this happen. So when you put women in more leadership positions and hopefully over more resource positions, decision-making positions, it makes a difference.
Yeah, Larissa, go.
Is it still on? I wasn't going to say anything because I feel in some ways like I'm echoing so much of what you're saying, but you just inspired me to add something more to it, and that is part of the reason that I get up and go to work every day is for myself, and part of it is for all of you. So it's hard, right? Working in finance is hard. Working when I started out my career as a trader. I was the only institutional female trader in the United States. I was the only one. It was hard. It was hard. I would go and lock myself in the bathroom and cry. But the important thing is to keep going, is to get up every morning and find something great about what you do. Fortunately, I love what I do. I love what I do. And you get up and you keep doing it over and over and over again. I think about my days as like these little grains of sand, and I'm putting these little grains of sand on the scale, and I keep putting more grains of sand on the scale, and at some point, it's gonna tip. And it's gonna tip not just for me, but also Julie's putting grains of sand on sand, and Morgana's putting grains of sand. We're all putting grains of sand, and it's gonna tip, and women are gonna be seen for their contributions and for their successes, and we're not gonna see gender. We're not gonna be seeing women in the boardroom and women at the head of companies as tokens, but as real representatives and voices. And that's why I keep doing it. And I do it for my son.
Calder, come here. Come here. Come here.
I do it for my almost 8-year-old son because
Oh,
it's
and you've got the
important.
right shirt on. This is terrific.
It's important for him to see because it's a sacrifice, right?
So, Calder, I understand that you've been thinking about this question, right? And so do you have any, first of all, I want you to, what does that mean when you hear your mom talk about things like that? About
It
how
means I really want to vote.
That is
I
awesome.
actually know, but I think I know who I want to be on the $10 bill.
Who?
I want my mom's cat Sumatra.
Awesome.
I thought you were going to put Storm on.
Your cat, that is awesome. Wait, is your cat still alive? Your cat's still
No.
alive? Oh.
Well, he's now picking. Okay, so we were talking this morning. He wanted to put his cat on because it's a girl, and he said, well, she's very strong and she's very smart, and I just thought that was so
That
cool.
is awesome.
But I said, but she's still, but I
knows
said
how to fetch.
she knows how to fetch.
That's awesome.
But I said she can't be on the $10 bill because she's still alive. So now you've updated it to my cat, who's dead. So.
Wait, no, let's see.
So maybe we should put my cat on.
Okay.
So-
Well, that's, you know,
Maybe
well, that's great.
we should put my great-great-great-great-grandmother.
Yeah, you
That
could
is
do that
awesome.
too.
Why she? Why would we put?
I don't know because I don't know her.
Well, I think the fact that you like to vote, I think we've all taken a great lesson from that. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for what your mom's doing for all of us too.
Can I add one more thing before? Sorry, to answer that last question. The other thing I would love to see change, I think we're starting to change in politics. I'd love to see the media change. I think the way media represent women, how the roles, I think we're starting to see cracks in that ceiling. I mean, I think some of the Emmys, we saw some of those changes, but it absolutely kills me some of the dribble that's on TV and on movies and the way that they represent. And you know, I have, as I said, my daughter just turned 8 last weekend, and she's now just starting to go into the media that I didn't control. Up until now, she was like an NPR kid, as my coworkers call her. I was able to really surround her with really positive role models. And now at sort of 7, 8, she goes to friends' houses. They're watching a few more sort of mainstream movies. and some of these roles are just horrible for women, and the women are chasing after the boys, and they're waiting to be rescued, and I think we're starting to see some of that positivity. And for those that haven't seen it, there's a great documentary called Misrepresentation that I prescribe to lots of people around me. So I think that is another avenue that needs to change for the dialogue, because I think how we can make changes, but until that gets represented in the media, it sort of doesn't become in the mainstream, in the mass perception of what a CEO looks like or what a hero looks like, and they don't have to be wearing high heels and spandex. So.
Well said. Okay, I think we have, Meg, do we have time for one more question? Quick,
okay.
Make it good.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
Sorry.
No pressure.
Speaking of high heels, something that I noticed that you all have been talking about, and that many of you are, although you MBA students, I assume, are not, is being a mother and being a woman as well and working. How do we change the perception of a mother who is working? Because like you said, you're one of the, you had to go out and find 5 other women who were in your same position who were pregnant, and you had to make your own program for maternity. Like, how do we change people's perception? Like you said, superheroes. Well, you can't very well have a pregnant superhero. But how do we yeah, good idea. Patent that.
You heard it here, folks, first.
Patent that, but that's very true.
Get all the working moms, yeah.
I'm sorry, I thought.
Yeah,
yeah,
Great idea. It's a great
it's
question.
hard. It sounds painful. But anyway, how do we change the perception of adding like parenthood as well as being a woman into the mix? Like when you said in media, people are asked about their kids, the moms are asked about their kids and how they're going to be able to balance the work life. Well, how can we make it such that that's part of a matter of fact? That doesn't need to be a question.
Okay, we're going to make this the Twitter round. So 140, not characters, but I'll give you syllables or words.
I think you said it. I think it's got to be about parenthood and not just about women. If the person didn't have to be dead, I would say Sheryl Sandberg and her, what she's doing at Facebook about paternity and parenthood and making that a part of the national dialogue is a great first step.
As I said, making it a human issue, right? There are things that women deal with as being parents. There are things that men deal with being parents. There are things that single people deal with being human. So it's an issue of we need to expand the dialogue, because otherwise it will always be a woman's issue and it will always be divisive. So if I can just add one last thing, I wanted to thank Treasurer Rios for, this is the best example of what women in government can do, just raising this issue that had never been discussed before. So thank you.
I too want to extend my thank you not only to Treasurer Rios, but also to our phenomenal panelists here. Thank you for engaging us in this dialogue. And also, you said something earlier. You said this is the start of the conversation. It's not the end of the conversation. So I want to make sure that as you go out and do whatever it is that you're going to do tonight, whatever meal that you're going to eat or table that you're going to sit at or conversation you're going to get on over email, I want you to think about the dialogue that's been started tonight and think about your role in continuing the conversation beyond what you've heard here this evening. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, panelists, for joining us. And check back on the Dean Speaker Series website for more information on future Dean Speaker Series. I think we've got a whole host of really amazing people coming up in the near future, this week and next. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you again to our special guests. Thank you.